This derive, I used a tracker app to help me be more productive and cover more ground. I took a spontaneous drive from Westchester, Inglewood, and Hawthorne down to Redondo and Hermosa Beach, up to Marina del Rey, and then back to Hawthorne, Inglewood, and Westchester areas. My main focus and central idea was to address how does infrastructure, nature, and art coexist and in what ways do they overlap? How do spaces include, exclude, separate, benefit, or cause harm? How do spaces inform demographics, class, and notions of old, new, beginnings, and endings? I traveled through pathways, districts, landmarks, encountered many boundaries, edges, walls, and shorelines. I was born and raised for part of my childhood in Hawthorne, so as I drove through it, I recognized a lot of places, such as the dentist on 131st Street that I attended as a child, and it is an example of how reality is also a construct of experience. After leaving Hawthorne, I headed down Hermosa Beach, where the obstructions of boundaries became a lot more frustrating to me. I tried finding parking to sit down and have my lunch, but I was faced with having to pay a fee, which is a prime example of the privatization of nature across beaches and most of LA areas. I determined not to spend money to just eat my lunch. I made several U-turns and turnarounds at pay booths and eventually wandered down into a park. Standing there greeting me was this shed with eyelashes, pupils, and a smiling mouth. I reflected on how my frustration about not being able to be within 100 feet of the sand to have my meal, interacting with the feeling of happiness that this little shed brought me. Documented the way in which fences, buildings, and signs created barriers and barricades, in a way secluding the ocean and separating something so symbolic of freedom, now ironically unattainable unless I paid a fee. Throughout this whole drive, I also documented something very notable about cities, which is the cables, satellites, posts, and wires that cut through the sky from the ground. They are impossible to miss and hard to avoid, and as I photographed, they became part of the compositions. In Marina del Rey and Playa Vista, I was faced with another kind of barrier created by infrastructure. Neighborhoods between Del Rey and Playa Vista, along and off Inglewood Boulevard, there's a countless amount of dead ends, canals, and fences that were created to make space for freeways. Pretty present community of diversity and art and nature and culture, which in some ways I interpreted it to be fighting against these real obstructions and destructions of space, but their coexistence should not be misinterpreted or romanticized. Communities face real social and environmental consequences from these freeways. I saw a lot of local art and murals, of which my favorite was a white chalk drawing of a cartoon duck saying, "Estoy hasta los huevos del coronavirus," which translated from Spanish means, "I am up to my balls with coronavirus." I then headed back toward Westchester, where the nodes such as metros, LAX, and large areas that filter crowds via transportation become increasingly apparent as you get closer to LAX. There's also noticeable landmarks and billboards, and I even saw some pink flamingos on somebody's lawn. The purpose of this derive was a documentation within a densely populated city of how spaces are constructed, divided, and perceived through an accumulation of history, culture, architecture, experiences, and abstractions, and how a space where art and ideas are communicated and traded daily can parallel social and environmental consequences.